After all that nonsense with the Opteron board and the other Intel board, I finally have a working system. I made a couple changes from the initial parts list that I had. I switched out an SSD with a different one, and I'm using the 3 terabyte Western Digital Green that I had in my main system, which was my OS X boot drive. So I just stuck that in there, and it's got like my Final Cut Pro, and pretty much that's it on it. I'm pretty much just going to use this system for Final Cut Pro. There are a couple little programs that I'm also going to use it for that I just simply cannot find Windows equivalents for. One is XLD, which is an open source audio converter, and it's like the best program I've found for converting FLACs, which I download or acquire, to Apple Lossless for iTunes. So it just works really well. It handles multiple CPUs. It'll encode like 8 at once using all the cores, so it's really fast. And I just cannot find a good program that does the same thing. Another one I really like is something along the lines of like Batch Automator Actions for iTunes or some nonsense. I can't remember the name. I'll put it in. But basically what it does is it lets you select, say, an entire list of videos for, like let's say it's season 1 of a TV show. You can select the entire list, say tag, and it will go through one by one sequentially and automatically put in the episode information for, it'll just do it sequentially for the whole season. And it works really, really well. And I cannot find an equivalent program to do metadata editing. The only thing I found in Windows was MetaX, and 1, it's not free. I mean, it's only $10, that's not a big deal. But 2, the 2 files I've tried to use it on, it just destroys the file and I have to rip it again. So yeah, that's no good. So those are the 3 programs I really want to use. And the cool thing is I can use those files over the network. I can just mount the network drive and then just do the batch tagging and everything remotely. So it'll be pretty easy to do. Getting the board in here was no small feat. The main problem with the other board was that it had a large metal plate on the bottom, and that holds the heat sinks sandwiches the motherboard between the heatsink and this plate. And the case that I have, this cheap Corsair 100R or whatever the hell it is, it just doesn't have the room over here. There's a plate that's in the way, or like the case bends up, so if you put the plate in, it just doesn't lie flat. So I was looking into alternate methods to clamp this on, and in addition I also needed another set because I wanted to make sure I had that plate for the other motherboard when I sell it. So I ordered the bottom brackets for a socket 604 fan, a heatsink, and the thing is, you gotta get kind of lucky with this because socket 604, these are socket LGA 771, they're newer slightly. The thing is, the holes line up, but the actual heat sinks are not the same, so you can't interchange them despite the fact that they fit. The reason is the socket 604 is actually taller, so if you take a socket 604 heatsink and put it on this board, even though the holes line up and it attaches, it actually won't make solid contact with the CPU and the chips will overheat. I used the bottom plates, and these are 771 heatsinks. So it turns out on this board, I was actually able to use these bottom plates to hold the CPU in. The downside was they still didn't fit. So I had to just pop the Dremel and pop out the Dremel and chop off the little edges. You can see in the picture how I knocked off the top little curved part. And yeah, it works fine. I mean, it's a little annoying because in order to put because they don't attach to the bottom, in order to put the motherboard in, you have to put the board in with just screws holding the plate on. Put the board in, screw it all in so it's tight, carefully unscrew the just blank screws, apply thermal paste to just this top one, and then attach the heatsink, because that plate has to be wedged in the right spot or else it'll never work. You could probably get away without doing this in a larger case. In this case, I couldn't get to the screw up here without having to remove the heatsink. So just on this particular case, I had to do this convoluted thing where I had to install it with the back plate screwed in temporarily and then swap it for the heatsink once it's actually attached to the case. So it was a little annoying, but it wasn't too bad once I figured it out. Another change is I bought this Noctua 120mm fan, and I've also got a lot more memory. Currently there is 24 gigs. I have 6 4-gig sticks inside it. And yeah, they were pretty cheap. I think I got all of them for $25 or something total, maybe $30, which isn't too bad for 24 gigs of memory. And yeah, I've also changed the video card. I was going to use just whatever I had lying around, but I ended up finding an older BFG Tech GTX 275 on Amazon, of all places. I never buy used stuff on Amazon, but it was only $30, and it's a 2-gig card, I believe. Works perfectly in Mac OS, no issues whatsoever. Another thing I did to the case was I took some double-sided tape and just put some paper over the top 120mm vents. I personally really don't like vents on the top of the case. I understand why they're there, but if I'm not using them, I don't want them open. Mostly just because of dust. I don't have a problem with them being open for airflow. In fact, they're very good for airflow. The problem is I just hate the fact that dust gets on all the chips and stuff. Like it really gets way in there and it covers all the memory. It's just a real pain to clean. I much prefer, yeah, dust is going to come in through the front, but I don't mind it so much like just depositing right there. It's when it gets all over the board that I find it just kind of annoying. But I will remove this if it turns out I need to for heat reasons. Because right now this whole area right here gets very hot, around 60 degrees Celsius, which isn't terrible. I just don't like having computers run too hot. So I may get a second 120mm and just fill up the 2 slots on the top and just leave that blank. And right now I was working. When the whole thing's sealed, I've got 2 140mm fans installed at the front. They're not very powerful. They're the ones that come with my Fractal Design R4 cases, and they work well. They're not super powerful. They're very quiet though. One thing to note is that this case is really freaking stupid, and that it doesn't use standard fan mount screws on the front. They use these really long screws that are thinner, and they're not the self-tapping kind. My Cooler Master Elite 130 also has the same problem, but it has one fan at the front, and it comes with 4 screws. This one has 2 spots for 2 fans, but it only comes with screws for one of them. So luckily I managed to find some screws that were short, but they were I was able to just connect them in a way that it worked. But it's just stupid. Why the hell don't they put in, is it really costing that much to put in a couple more screws? They give you a ton of extra screws anyway. I mean, I know this is a really cheap case, but still, it's just really annoying when they use something like proprietary like that, so to speak, and they don't include it. It's just stupid. So that was a little annoying. And I don't have a back plate for the I don't have an I/O shield for the motherboard, but that's not a big deal. In fact, it lets some air out by the RAM, so that's not a big problem. And as for installing Mac OS on this, I ran into a roadblock at the beginning, and I was starting to get a little depressed about it, because I'm like, oh god, I went through all these other boards and now I'm going through this crap. Ugh. I figured out the problem, and it was just the classic setting up of a Hackintosh where it's just trying different boot settings until you get it to actually start up. And once I figured out the right combination, perfect, done. I installed Yosemite, and it installed just fine right off the bat. The problem was I couldn't enable the video card, any video card. Every single one I tried to enable, it would just lock up at the startup, or it would just be a blank screen. Eventually I figured out the right combination. You have to turn on PCI root ID, set it to 1. You have to have the NPCI 0x2000 flag, and you need graphic enabler set to yes. That allowed me to run this system no problem. Once I figured out that combination, system just started up, and I haven't had any problems with it. The only problem with it, so to speak, which has nothing to do with Hackintosh because it's the motherboard that does this, is the fan control. The CPU fans are quite loud when they're on full power, and unfortunately the BIOS revs the fans constantly. Like, you'll just sit there, like even just sitting in Mac OS, it's just sitting there going woo, and it's just so annoying. I get really bothered by fan speed changes like that. I'd rather, even if it was kind of loud, I can deal with it as long as it's steady. This is just constant revving up and down, up and down. I haven't really tried all the different settings. There's a couple, like workstation and server and stuff. They all seem to perform pretty much exactly the same way. The exception being full on, which runs the fans at ridiculous speeds. One thing I could do is set it to full on and put in some of Noctua's speed limiting adapters, which are just resistors. And I could try doing that. Maybe that'll solve the problem and make it a little bearable, a little more bearable on the CPU fan side of things. The video card doesn't really make much noise at all, which surprises me because it's an older card. As you can hear, the fans are fairly loud when the BIOS hasn't taken control of them. When you first turn on the system, it takes quite a long time for it to do internal tests on the memory. So eventually it does kick on, and the fan control kicks on from the BIOS, so it just drops in noise like crazy. But while you're waiting for it to do the tests, see, big difference. Yeah, so while you're waiting for it to do the tests, it's quite loud. But like I said, it's revving all the time, so it becomes fairly loud when you're running the system. And you can see just the Chameleon bootloader starting up. And it starts up very quickly thanks to the fact it's running on an SSD. And it should be done in a second now. It's just loading the GeForce sensors. I'm just using this crappy Dell monitor, so the resolution's all weird, but you get the idea. As for installation, it was fairly simple. I mean, I really only just picked the non-DSDT setting, and that was it. The only other thing I had to install was the driver for the onboard Intel Ethernet, and that was it. Everything else was just out of the box. I mean, I seriously have had no issues with this thing whatsoever, other than finding out those settings to start it up. So yeah, I'm quite impressed with this build. I'm running 10.10.5 right now on this. The only thing it says is, or the only kind of glitch is that it's saying 24 gig 0 megahertz RAM. I think that's fairly easy to fix. That's just in the SM BIOS file. You can generate it. And yeah, so I'm quite happy with this thing. It will be my secondary machine for stuff like Final Cut Pro, as I mentioned. It pulls around 130 watts when idle and jumps up to like 250, give or take, when it's under heavy load, which isn't bad. I mean, it's a 430 watt power supply, and you want, in a perfect world, you want your computer using approximately 50% of the load. That's generally where it's the most efficient, and it's not a huge stress on the system or on the power supply. So it's a good balance to have it around 50% where you want it. I'm just firing up Cinebench here just so we can see if it'll start doing the revving thing, because it's actually quite quiet right now. But when you start getting it to do stuff, it really starts doing this annoying revving. So we'll see what we can do. Staying fairly quiet. I did change a setting on it to have it run the fan lower. I don't know if it's actually going to override it. We're getting CPU temps between 60 and 67 degrees Celsius. There's, oh no, it's just a cicada. Never mind. I thought the fans were revving up. But yeah, we're getting between 60 and 69. I've seen it go as high as 70. It's quite warm in this room. It is summer after all. So yeah, that's to be expected. But I haven't had any stability problems at all so far. And you know, as you can see, it's plowing through this fairly quickly. One other thing I wanted to mention is I have this very cheap and kind of old USB 2.0 2-port switch. So yeah, what I got is I have this, and I've got a couple cables, and I'm gonna plug one into this machine, one into my main machine, and I can use one of the additional video inputs on my monitor, so I can just switch the USB keyboard and mouse over and just switch the video input, and then I have control of the other machine. I also have this cheap ass USB sound stick, which is just a very basic mic and headphone port. Works perfectly on macOS out of the box. Just plugged it in, and I'll just run it into my amp. I don't need like fantastic sound, I just need some sound out of this thing, so not a big deal. I can't really think of anything else to talk about on this thing. It was a very, very simple build. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to show the like building the thing like and installing all the software. It's all been done a million times on YouTube. I just wanted to mention some of the specific things that happened with this particular motherboard, namely the ridiculousness of having to chop off parts of the metal with a Dremel, and just the boot settings to get it to really work reliably. The fan behavior occurs in Windows. I did run Windows 8 on this machine, and it absolutely behaves the exact same way in Windows, so it's not an issue with fake SMC or anything like that. It's simply some artifact of the old BIOS in this thing. Like, it's just Supermicro tends to use really basic older BIOSes on all their systems. They're very stripped down. That's what makes them so reliable, but you don't get those fine-tuning settings that you would get on another motherboard. But trying to find a dual socket LGA 771 board that isn't either ridiculously overpriced or isn't made by Supermicro is practically impossible. There are very few boards made by other companies, and the ones that are usually have some kind of weird restriction, like they don't work with certain chips or whatever. So I think the X7 DCA-L, which I got for this one, is a great board, especially if you can find one with the audio. The audio is nice to have on it, and although I'm not 100% sure if it's supported in Mac OS, it should work. There's usually a driver. It's a Realtek one. There's usually drivers for that. It's just a little more fiddly to have to install the driver. I was pretty much going to end the build there, but I decided on getting some other stuff just to give me the ability to import videos directly from my camera. Well, I should say directly from the SD card of my camera, since my camera only supports USB 2, which kind of defeats the purpose of getting something faster. So I picked up this Silverstone SDXC USB 3.0 reader. You have to be careful when you're buying these things, because a lot of them are actually USB 2 readers and just USB 3 ports. So one way you can tell is that there's only one USB 3 port on it. That's because the other one is going to the actual reader. I also got an Innotek USB 3.0 PCIe controller. This one I picked specifically because it's got an internal header, which I'll need for this. And this uses the Fresco Logic 1100 chipset. I think it's the 1100. Ugh, helicopters. Anyway, yeah, this chipset should be supported right out of the box in Mac OS, so that shouldn't be a problem. And it just needs a power connector. This particular one came with some adapters and splitters. It also came with a low profile adapter for low profile bracket if you need one, but I don't. And I also got just a simple 5 1/4 inch bay adapter, since this particular case does not have any 3.5 inch bays. So I picked this guy up from StarTech. All this was on Amazon. The funny thing is, all this came up to like $65, which is almost as much as the like the motherboard and a cooler. So at least this stuff can transfer over to a new system pretty easily, so it's not a big deal. I don't mind spending some money on this one. This is the controller, or sorry, the reader itself, and you can see it reads pretty much everything. I only need CF cards and SD cards. SD is really what I use most of the time, but occasionally I need a CF card. And yeah, you get an extra USB 3 port, and we've got the internal header connector. And this one uses the same controller as modern power MacBooks. So in theory, this should work just out of the box as well. So we'll find out. And let me just shut down the system since I'm actually using it right now. And we'll see if everything can get arranged properly in there. I also have an extension cable just in case I need to run power to the card across the board. There we have it, all installed. As you can see, the plastics don't match 100%. It rarely does when you get different companies. No one can agree on what black is, so that's not unusual. These two SuperSpeed 3.0 ports are still dead, as are the audio ports. Nothing's plugged in, but I don't really need them. I still have this USB 3.0 port, which is part of the reader, so that all works, and I tested it in macOS. The card reads just fine. So that's pretty much the end of this build. If you're looking at building one of these, I mean, I had some parts to begin with, but you're talking about like $300 or probably like closer to $200. And it's a decent machine. Again, this is mostly for rendering and stuff, so it focuses mostly on CPU power. Obviously, if you're building this for gaming, you would just get a single CPU and a much better video card, and it would probably end up costing more overall because video cards tend to cost quite a bit when you're getting up to decent ones. So another option that I might consider in the future is either putting in a fan controller. Depending on how these fans work out, I mean, I'm still having it where it's revving, and I actually left the machine on all night the other day to back up through Time Machine. And when I woke up, the CPU fans were just like locked on full speed. I have no idea why. I don't know if it was like an overheating condition where the system just went, oh, I better run it at full and never slow down, or what. So I'm not 100% sure on that. More testing is needed. But I might override it with a fan controller. Another option is also getting a Blu-ray reader because I rip Blu-rays, so it's convenient to just rip them directly onto this. But it's not really needed. I mean, I have two readers in my main machine. There's not a no real performance impact from ripping on your system while you're playing a game or whatever. It really is not very intensive at all. It's essentially just reading the disk and decrypting it. I'm not really concerned about having to rip on my main machine. And Handbrake can pretty much just encode in place, meaning I can have both machines on, which I usually do if if I need this thing, they're both going to be on. And just read the file from like my downloads directory or the desktop and write the encoded file right back to the machine. So it's reading over the network and writing over the network, and it's not that big a deal because your a standard gigabit Ethernet network supports about 100 megs a second, and there's no way you're going to be encoding that quickly, even with 8 cores. So it's not too big a deal. It shouldn't have any real performance impact. So I might just leave it like that. I was actually going to take the optical drive out of my TV computer, since I don't really use the optical drive in that, since we ended up just getting a standalone Blu-ray player. So I was going to just put that in there, but then I realized I don't know where the hell the blank plate is for my other case, and I didn't want to leave it open, and these ones aren't compatible, so I guess I have to leave the drive in. I don't know. I might just get another drive just for the hell of it, but again, like another drive is like $50, so it's like you do realize that the 2 drive bays have more value than the entire computer. But at least they're things that can move on to the next machine. If I were to replace this motherboard with a faster one, I could always replace it and then just sell the board. Whereas if I built a new machine or got rid of this, whatever, these things could transfer over to my main machine. It's not a big deal. I hope you enjoyed the build, even though obviously I didn't show putting it all together bit by bit. It's kind of boring, and the truth is, building a Hackintosh is exactly the same as building a PC, and it's just a matter of picking the parts. So, yeah, there's a million videos of people putting together PCs, and even a million videos of people putting together Hackintoshes. So, I wasn't too concerned with filming every last little aspect of this build. I mostly wanted to go over the parts I used and, just the odd issues I had when getting it all set up.